Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Manitoba Agriculture Crop Talk webinar. If you have any questions during the presentations today, please type them into the question section of the GoToWebinar menu, and we will answer them at the end of the presentations. This webinar is being recorded, and you will receive a link to the recording. Thank you.
Thanks, Laurie. I'd like to welcome everybody to the June the 22nd Crop Talk webinar, and today we're going to be going a little bit longer. Called it the extended version because while we had a busy week, we had producers doing their darndest to try to get the crop in before seeding deadlines. We had weather situations going through that that caused some anxious moments in some communities, and we had great growing conditions, and combine all that together, it just made for interesting times and interesting questions, and so with that, we decided that we would maybe run a little longer, but we would be able to talk about quite a few things today. So to start off today, we're going to have Kim Brown on, and she's going to talk about managing our 2022 weed control program. And I think the big thing what we're seeing right now is we're seeing a lot of weeds growing the same speed as crop, and weather conditions maybe not being helpful. So Kim's going to give us some advice and some update information on some of the things we should be watching out for. Then we got to deal with some of this Unseeded Acres, and we have a group put together, Marla Rickman, Darren Bond, and Kaylin Morrison, all put together a presentation here to discuss what to do with some of these unseeded acres and what to do this year to help us prepare for next year on some of those acres which may remain too wet to do with anything this year. So it's going to be an interesting topic to go through, and I think a lot of producers throughout the province are dealing with this. We don't have just one area that is showing a large amount of unseeded acres. We just have a lot of the province that has acres that are going to go unseeded or are unseeded right now. So we're going to go to them after that, and then a few questions for the crop scouting panel to end off the day. So with that, in order to try to keep as much on time, just with the one slide I wanted to show as to where we are in seeding. This came out yesterday in our crop report. So as you can see, we're about 91% completed. And with the rain on the weekend, I think it kind of slowed everybody down again. So we probably haven't got a lot higher than that 91% from since the weekend. So still a few acres to plant and lots of things to do. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Kim Brown Livingston, and she is going to give us some information regarding managing the weeds and getting our spraying season off. Some areas have already got going pretty good. Some areas are just waiting to start, but I think it'd be good for her to go through some of the things we should be watching for. So thanks for doing this, Kim, and take it away.
Okay, thanks very much, you guys. I appreciate you guys helping me too. I'm having technical difficulties again with my laptop. So Marla is running my presentation for me, so you will hear me saying next slide when I need her to advance for me. So Marla, if you don't mind going to the next one. Okay, so we talked briefly about critical weed-free periods last week. This is basically the length of time that the crop must be kept free of weeds to prevent yield loss. So understanding this helps with the timing and the frequency of our post-emergent spraying, but this can really vary, and it varies with weed densities, the timing of weed emergence, a ton of environmental conditions, and then any factors that affect canopy closure and crops. So that's like row spacing, plant population, crop height, fertility, etc., etc., etc. So what we need to be considering and thinking about is eliminating spraying after the critical weed-free period is over. There's much less impact on yield. In fact, the yield losses have already occurred if there's still weeds in that crop that haven't been dealt with by that time, or if they emerge after that, they just don't cause that much yield loss from that point on, but it reduces herbicide use, especially those in-crop sprays, and it reduces the risk of resistance, because as we all know, resistance is coming at us, and every time we spray a chemical, we're one step closer to resistance for that product, because that's just the way it works. We only have a limited number of sprays that we can have before the weeds kind of get around that product. So Marla, next slide, please. So there's not a lot of data for crops in Western Canada. For canola, there is some older data. It's from over 20 years ago. It suggested that keeping your canola weed-free up to the 4-leaf period was where we needed to be really concentrated on our weed control. Now, there is a new research project going on by Dr. Rob Golden at U of M. This is the first year of it, so the plots are in the ground now. There are also collaborators in Saskatchewan and Alberta with Ag Canada and with the University of Saskatchewan. And so that hopefully, that'll get us some new data on obviously our up-to-date cultivars, and they're doing things like varying row spacing and plant densities and all that type of thing. So that we're looking forward to getting some results from that. But again, that is new, and we won't have results on that for a little bit. For corn, the data is mostly from Ontario. We really don't have anything Manitoba specific, at least not any research has been done in this area. If you're using the leaf over method, then you're looking at 3 to 8 leaf stage is where we need to keep that crop weed free. And the collar method, which is where maybe a lot of us are more familiar with, the V stages, that's basically 2 to 6 visible collars. So that corn needs to be clean for a long time. Corn is very competitive, but not when it's small. And if those weeds get in there and we end up with that carpet of green foxtail and then the broadleaf start coming, that just takes over the corn, and we see tremendous yield losses, or can see tremendous yield losses if it's weedy for too long. So soybeans, there's actually some fairly recent data from the University of Manitoba. So that was a master's project by Jonathan Rossett and his advisor, Dr. Rob Golden. And I think that was published in 2020. So it was the late, 2017, 2018, 2019 years type thing when the research took place. Now that varied quite tremendously. The critical weed-free period was anywhere from VE, which is emergence, all the way up to the V3 stage. And they did find at the end of the research, though, that the end of the critical weed-free period is affected by row spacing, by plant density, and also by variety. And we know our soybean varieties, we can kind of have the big sexy ones that are big and bushy and lots of growth on them. And then we do have some that are much shorter stature, they don't bush out as much. And so, they're kind of a different looking plant compared to what I call the big sexy ones. They did find, though, their research showed that narrow rows shorten the critical weed-free period by up to 2 developmental stages and reduce the total number of herbicide applications by 1 without causing significant yield loss. Now, this is, again, critical. Now, this year, this is something to keep in mind. We are definitely in pesticide shortage times, and we may not be able to get in a second time. In fact, most of us probably won't get in a second time. And if you've only got one spray, you've got to make it work at the very best it can. But normally, if you were, you might be able to shorten up your sprays and have less sprays on that crop, depending on things like narrow row spacing and that type of thing. Now, we're just talking about weed control here. I know there's lots of data about row spacing in soybeans, and there's other factors other than weed control. And normally, it's a bit of a wash at the end of the day for overall yield, whether the narrow rows or the wide rows are better. There's lots of advantages to wide rows too, but I'm talking strictly from a yield, from a weed perspective, and how the weeds affect yield. We're talking about how narrow rows will shorten up that critical weed-free period and can reduce our reliance on our post-emergent herbicides. So next slide, please, Marla. On talking about pulses, there's some research in Alberta from Ag Canada. It suggests that the critical weed-free period is 1 to 2 weeks after emergence. Now, normally I'd never be talking to you about peas in this late in June, but we've had a lot seeded quite late in the year because of the year that we've had. So this is maybe still relevant. I know there's lots of pea seeding or pea spraying going on right now, and I am going to touch a bit on staging as soon as I'm done this set of slides here. In Saskatchewan research, they found that higher and more consistent yields were possible when peas were sprayed at 2 nodes versus 8 nodes. Now, 8 nodes, that's off-label. Most of your products, you need to have that spray on by 6 nodes. So obviously, in this case, case they were spraying too late if they're spraying at 8 nodes, but an early spray was always better with peas versus a late spray. And peas are something that they can be super short and be at 6 nodes already, and it's time to spray, or we should have sprayed already. So peas are something you always have to watch. Now for dry beans and fabas, these are poor competitors for most of the season. Early post-emergent weed control is crucial, and coming back in with products that you can use throughout the season as well. And also when you can, there's different pre-emergent products, residual products to use depending on which variety, which kind of dry beans, and depending whether they're fabas or dry beans. So that is something to have planned ahead of time. And so that's crucial to have used those products in those crops, because they just are poor competitors, and they need to have the weeds controlled from the get-go. Next slide, please. For cereals, we really don't have any data on critical weed-free period. You'll read sometimes that it says 1 to 3 leaf. That's pretty early. What we do have, though, in our guide to crop protection is some research done by out of Alberta by John O'Donovan. Now, this is older research, but it's very good. It's still relevant. And basically, these are yield loss tables looking at how much the density of wild oats, and then also the timing of emergence. So I've just highlighted this table here. You can see in the yellow there. And so here is 20 wild oats per meter squared, and that's about 2 per square foot. So that's not a lot of wild oats. But if they're 1 leaf stage ahead of the crop, that can cause 19% yield loss. If they're at the same leaf stage as the crop, then that's about 11% yield loss. And if they were behind the crop, then that is a 7% yield loss. So again, getting those wild oats out early, if they're a leaf stage ahead of the crop, they can cause basically almost 3 times as much damage as if they were 1 leaf stage and behind. So keeping those weeds out of there when that crop is small, and making sure those weeds don't get ahead of that crop is really crucial for things like wild oats and cereals. And then further to that research, we have this decision table, and it talks about, is your crop healthy, growing well with good stand establishment, yes versus no. And then if it's no, it says don't use this guideline. Yield losses may be greater and might be necessary to spray at lower densities. But if your crop was healthy and growing well with good stand establishment, if yes was your answer, then you need to determine the leaf staging of the crop, and then you choose one of the following options. And then again, here was your 1 leaf stage ahead of the crop, and then the middle bars there are equal stages of the crop, and then over on the right-hand side of that graphic is 1 leaf stage behind your crop. And then here it tells you to spray if your wild oats are ahead of the crop, you need to spray if there's 5 per square meter. And that's not very many. And then spray it equal, if they're equal, the leaf staging is equal between the wild oats and the crop, and then you would spray if you have 8. But if your wild oats are behind your crop, you would only spray if you had 15 wild oats per square meter. And so again, tremendous difference there, basically about 3 times the amount of wild oats in density. Next slide, please, Marla. And this table here, this is similar. We've got similar type table for yield losses in green foxtail. And in this case, the table is a bit simpler. And basically the table says, is the green foxtail density less than 100 plants per square meter? Either no or yes. And if it's less than 100 plants, you could go all the way down to the bottom here. And again, this is per square meter, so you can divide that by 10 to get per square foot. And basically here's your yield losses, your percentage wise. So even, if we looked at right here in the middle at 200 green foxtail per square meter, which is 20 per square foot, that would be about a 9% yield loss. But if your density is less than that, then basically you would be looking at following this decision tree down, and you would say, when has it emerged? Has it emerged within 1 week of the crop? And this case, we're not really looking at equivalent leaf stages, because this is a warm season grass versus a cool season grass, like wild oats is a cool season grass. And again, if your answer was no, then your yield loss is insignificant. But if your answer was yes, so if they've emerged within 1 week of the crop, then we take a look at our daytime temperatures. Are they 20 degrees or higher? Again, this is because it's a warm season grass. And then our answer is yes or no. If our answer is no, then again, yield loss would be significant. But if our answer is yes, then you come down again to this table at the bottom, do your counts, and take a look at your yield loss that you could be getting from those green foxtails. So next slide, please. So How to shorten the critical weed-free period. Basically, any practice that increases the crop's competitive ability. And we went over this earlier: row spacing, plant populations, cultivar choices, fertility, anything you have control over that would increase that crop's competitive ability, you need to be doing. Also, any practice that reduces the early interference from weeds. So that would be anything like tillage, your burn off, your pre-emerge with residual activity, even harvest management of weed seeds the previous fall, that type of thing. So anything that does that. And again, our ultimate goal too is to reduce the amount of post-emergent sprays, reduce the amount of weeds that see a post-emergent spray, and that will help us reduce herbicide resistance as well. So just quickly, just to highlight, this is in our guide to crop protection. This is our leaf staging for herbicide application. And so just to go over this graphic, and I don't have a pointer, but I just thought I would mention this. And just to make sure you're reading your labels and you're watching, I know our crops, again, are all over the board. Some of our cereals have been sprayed already. Anything that got in before a lot of the big rains in May, so anything that was seeded in kind of mid to third week in May there, has already been sprayed or is being sprayed now. But we do have a lot of cereals that are just very early on in their life cycle. And so again, just to watch your leaf staging, usually by the time you get your fourth leaf out, you start to see tillers, so don't count those as leaves. They'll come out of where that first leaf was. And if you look really closely over here on the very right hand side of the graphic, sometimes there's this little sheath that on the tiller, it's not there for very long, it's kind of thin and membranous, and it kind of disappears in the hot weather. But when you pull that leaf and the tiller that's coming out of that leaf, when you pull that back, you can see that. So you can differentiate between your tillers and your leaves, so you can make sure you have the proper leaf staging. But you do need to wait for your most of your graminicides. They can go in very early if they're being sprayed on their own. But the minute you start putting tank mix partners in, most of the times you're looking at 3 leaf stage or more, depending on the tank mix partner. And so you really need to be at that leaf stage for crop safety, and so that your yield isn't affected on your cereals. Next slide, please, Marla. This is for pea staging. Now, this is something that Dennis wanted me to cover today, and really watching these scale nodes versus true nodes on peas when we're talking about staging peas. And again, normally we'd never be talking about spring peas this late in the season, but we do have a lot of young pea crops still. So the scale node is not counted in staging for herbicide application. This year there seems to be 2 scale nodes, and they're both above ground. Lots of times I've seen one below ground, one above ground, but this year maybe a bit more shallow seeding, and peas came out of the ground pretty quick because they were growing into quite warm soil, and we are seeing those, but in most cases both of those scale nodes are above ground this year. For spraying, you count the leaf nodes, and these are what they call the elephant ear leaves that are attached to the stem. And if the elephant ear leaf is not fully expanded, then don't count it. So now this is a graphic from the Manitoba pulse and soybean growers, and down here at the bottom you see scale node 1, scale node 2. Now there is a leaf or a little bit of a branch here, but it doesn't have those big elephant ears. If you look at where the 3rd node is, this is when we're talking about those elephant ears, and then 4th node, 5th node, 6th node type thing. So again, once the leaves are out and fully expanded, you count that node. And if you watch your products, you know, those need to be on basically by 6th node stage for most of what we're using in peas. Next slide, please, Marla. So again, just in general, check the labels for crop staging for safe herbicide application. For very late seeding, you may have time for a burn off, but crops are emerging very, very quickly. And I'm not sure if this is something that our commodity specialists want to touch on, but basically, you know, we're talking, we could be 3 to 4 days for a new leaf in our cereals right now, because so they're putting on leaves very quickly. And so just be really careful. Just be ready to spray, because they're going to cycle through their growth stages a little bit quicker than normal because of the time of year we're at. Next slide, please. We were going to talk about tank mixes. I'm going to briefly talk about tank mix order, registered and supported tank mixes. There's lots of company resources out there. We've got really great reps in Manitoba. There's lots of information on the websites, and I think I'm just going to end up with this. So on our next slide, this is what they call WAM legs, or the mixing order for tank mixes. Big disclaimer here at the bottom: when in doubt, consult the label. And we do have our product pages in the guide. But also, you know, when in doubt, go to the actual label, which is available in the in the chem box that you're buying. It's very fine print though, very hard to read those, but they're available too through PMRA website, and I find that's easily searchable on your phone, and you can call up a label very quickly. And easiest if you just type in the PCP number, you search by PCP number, and then you can find the label very quickly. So the first thing in the tank, well, basically you would fill the tank first, or fill the tank at least half full, and then wettable powders and your flowables would go in first, and then you would agitate. If you need anti-flowing compounds or buffers, they go in next. The M stands for your MEs, or your microcapsule suspensions. We don't spray a lot of those, but we do have a little bit. Then the L is your liquids and your solubles, which is your solutions, your SCs, your SUs. ECs, this is emulsifiable concentrates. That's the bulk of, that's a lot of what we spray as ECs. Your G stands for your high load glyphosate, so they tend to go in the tank last. Even though they are a solution, they do go in the tank last, and your surfactants will go in last. And the only time there's a difference is if you're doing a tank mix with Centurion and or Select and Liberty, then you would be putting, in that case, Amigo. The adjuvant has to go in first, or you can get that mix will layer, or can layer in your spray tank, and that's really hard to get that to mix properly if you do that mixing order wrong. But that's very clear. That's on the labels, that's on our product pages in the guide, and that's about the only time really that your surfactant is supposed to go in first. Next page, please. Now I'll just read this really quickly, or actually this will be available on the for our recording as well. But the whales, or the WAM legs, is a bit simplistic. The products that fall within each letter actually do have their own mixing order. So if you're putting in multiple products that are in that same letter on the whales, which is a little more simplistic than what we just talked about, this WAM legs, with waters. So this is kind of a generic mixing order as well. So this one is very good. Water soluble bags, allow them to fully dissolve and disperse. Then you do your wettable powders. If you're doing water dispersible granules, that's your WDGs or your WGs or your SGs, and then you agitate to make sure the dry products mix and disperse before anything else goes in. And the formulations are usually really good, and we tend not to have a lot of issues with them mixing. In the old days, that used to take forever to get the dry products to mix properly. After that, we do our liquid flowables. In order, they would be suspension concentrates, followed by the SESPO emulsions, followed by, which are your SEs, which would be followed by these capsule suspensions. I don't think we have any of those. And then we do have some, the odd emulsion in water. But this is, if you did have some liquid flowables, this is the order they would go in the tank if you were doing multiples of that. And then in order after that, ECs would come first, then micro emulsifiable concentrates, MECs, and then oil dispersion would come after that. And then after that, our solutions, which is our soluble liquids, liquid fertilizers, and micronutrients. And be very careful when putting these in the tank. Make sure that's okay with the herbicide manufacturer, that they're on board with that, because sometimes throwing extra things in the tank can cause products to not work, and actually can cause crop damage as well. So just be really careful when you're doing additives in the spray tank. And a note here, compatibility agents and anti-foamers should be added before the pesticides, and adjuvants like non-ionic surfactants should be added based on specific label directions or based on their formulation. So again, follow the label. This is on our product pages in our guide to crop protection, but follow the label because we know that's what works with those products. So, and our next page, I just wanted to show you, this is from the Bayer website, their 2022 tank mix list. So they will have registered as well as supported tank mixes. So all you have to do is Google that. You can find their web page, and then there's like right on the bottom left-hand corner, it says tank mix list. And then when you get to that, it'll give you the 2022 list. And I just pulled the DSIS page out. I think this is timely. I know we're doing a lot of flea beetle spraying as well. And they will have the tank mix, whether it's registered or supported. So if it's supported, it's technically not on the label, but it is a supported use. And they also have tank mix order, which is really nice. And then the crop here for Invigor canola. So here, if you wanted to tank mix DSIS with Centurion and Liberty, it is a supported tank mix, and your mixing order is your Amigo. Again, that's where your Amigo has to go in first, followed by your Liberty, followed by your Centurion, followed by your DSIS. Again, if you're just mixing DSIS with straight Liberty, it's a supported tank mix, and it would be Liberty first and then DSIS. And again, again, that's for bigger canola. So all of the companies have websites like this. They're all very good. I just thought I'd highlight the Bayer one. I really like it because I like that they give us mixing order as well. And so this is a really good guideline, easy to get on your phone, and very, very, very handy to use. And you should have that handy at this time of year. And this is my last slide. So other tank mixes, always check with the manufacturer. And again, herbicides, micronutrients, check with all companies involved, because you don't want to have a mess on your hands. And even sometimes too, throwing things in the spray tank can just cause things to gel or things to kind of come out of solution. And then you've just got a mess in the spray tank to deal with when you need to be spraying. And again, this year with herbicide shortages everywhere, we just don't have time for that. And the availability of getting chemical it's really tight, and you might not be able to get more. So you need to be really careful with what you're doing this year. So that's all I had, and we can save questions for the end if we have time.
Hey, thanks, Kim. Actually, there's been a couple questions come in. I guess one has got to deal with and you mentioned it a couple times about the shortage of some herbicides.
Yep.
If you only have enough product to spray once with Liberty, what should my spraying strategy be? Is there a specific, I guess what they're thinking about, is there specific weeds that they should be watching for that once they get so big that their Liberty isn't going to control them? Or, I guess some advice as to how do I plan an application?
Yeah, and I'm a big fan of spraying Liberty twice. It works really well if you spray it twice. It also works really well if you spray it once and use a lot of water. So this year, use water, 10 gallons minimum. Go higher if you can. If you think Liberty works great at 10 gallons, you should see it work at 12 or 15. It works phenomenal. It does a really good job on grasses as long as you get the coverage. Now, our canola too is going to get up and growing well once we get beyond the beetles. If we get it up and growing beyond the beetles, it'll really going to take off in this weather. So I'd really be watching my leaf staging on those. I'd be watching. I don't want my grasses to get too far ahead. I guess Liberty, we know it does struggle a bit with the grasses. They're just a little harder to hit. They're more vertical, that type of thing. Just the architecture of that plant. It's just a little harder to hit. And traditionally, that's why we're throwing in something like a Centurion or Select to help out that Liberty. But again, if you're using Liberty and you use it once, we may want to go in just a touch later than you normally would. I would normally like to see you in there really early, but come back. You're going to have to wait a bit. You only get one shot, but you can't wait too late. You also need to be able to get coverage with Liberty, because once those crops start to cabbage, and once we start to get those leaves, that canola leaf is horizontal, and it'll cover the ground, and you're not going to get coverage onto the weeds that are underneath there that might start coming through later. So we need to make sure you still get that coverage on those weeds. And with Liberty, just use as much water as you can. It's not going to slow you down in the actual spraying operation, but it's going to slow you down. You're going to have more fill times, and that's just something to try to manage that so that you're able to speed up your fill times and get back spraying as soon as you can with Liberty. But that would be my strategy. I'd wait a bit longer than if I was going to spray twice, and but not too long, because that canola is going to take off, and we still have to cover those weeds. We still have to hit those weeds with the Liberty because it's a contact herbicide. So.
Okay, and another question, I guess this one's more regarding peas, because the question came in, peas are getting large. How late is too late before I start doing damage?
Yeah, and with the labels are usually up to 6 nodes. Anytime you go beyond that, you'll run the risk of you can hurt those peas. You've got to get the weeds out of there. You really have to watch peas. You can't go by size. You have to go by nodes, and they're reseeded late, but they're still growing very quickly, and they're not very tall, and I'm suspecting most of them are at 6 nodes already, or getting very close to that, even the late seeded ones. So you need to be in there. If you do need to spray late, then that is something that you need to be talking to your chem rep about, or your retailer about, and see, okay, what lots of times you end up having to spray anyways because you have to get those weeds out of there. But again, trying to mitigate that, lots of water, get good coverage. Even with the systemic herbicides, lots of water still helps. It gets you good, good spray distribution, that type of thing. But if they're out of stage, if they're way out of stage, then you'll run the risk of really damaging the peas. But once you get beyond those 6 nodes on peas, you start seeing them yellow up quite a bit more. But there's not a lot you can do about that. If you're really out of staging, then you'd have to come back with like a rescue treatment or something, something like just a straight Bazagran. That one you can use in peas all the way up to flowering. That is strictly a contact herbicide, so tons of water with that. But you could, if you're way out of staging on something like a Viper or an Odyssey, then basically that's your only option. There's not a lot of post emergent options in peas to start with, and that's why it's so important to watch your staging.
That's a good comment. I think I might see some of those old products come out again because of one, because of shortages, and two, because of our lateness. And Bazagran was always kind of the rescue one.
Yeah. Well, and Bazagran is bentazon, and that's in Viper, right? So you're spraying that anyways in the Viper, but it can be sprayed on its own. But it's a contact herbicide, and so tons of water, and it's really more of a rescue treatment, and it's got to be you got to use it right. So, but you do have that option up until flowering. That's not going to be that far away either. Like, especially if we get some heat and those peas are growing, the flowering isn't too far away.
Good point. Yeah, no, that's good information. Okay, thanks, Kim. You're gonna hang around for a bit, or are you? Okay.
No, I'm on my phone. I'll mute it now for now, but I'll be around for questions at the end.
Great, thanks. Okay, well, that was a good presentation by Kim. It gave us some heads up information regarding spraying, and good comments, I think, as well regarding increasing our water volumes to help in getting some better control this year. So thanks, Kim. From that, we're going to jump right over now to the deal with some of the issues with some of the unseeded acres that are out there right now. And I guess what we can do with those acres this year, and maybe what we can do to help get those acres in good shape for next year. So we have 3 people presenting, Marla, Darren, and Caleb. And what I'll do is I'll let them take over and start their presentation.
Thanks, Lionel. So it's Marla here, and yeah, we started talking about this. Obviously, we've been talking about this situation ahead of us for a while, but last week started to more seriously talk about the fact that we needed to bring some information forward and just get people thinking about, once we hit that June 20th deadline, what do we do with these fields that don't end up getting seeded? And as Lionel showed earlier, we're looking at 9-10% or so of fields being unseeded at this point. And so dragged along Darren and Callum into this discussion. If people don't know Callum, he is a grad student with Yvonne Lawley at the University of Manitoba looking at cover crops. He's also working as a summer student with us this year. So we figured we might as well bring him forward and use him while we have him here with us this summer. So just to kind of set the stage a bit here, obviously we know we were in a situation with heavy snowfall and a late spring and spring rainfall. Everything really has been set against us when it comes to trying to get things seeded this summer. And just that much kind of worse off where this seems to be where we have flooded acres or really wet fields. It just seems to have been going on so much longer than it normally would go on. So a lot of, again, these unplanted acres were either underwater, might remain waterlogged, might still be underwater in some areas, or have just had such heavy rains consistently, they just keep kind of backing up time and time again. And so farmers really have been looking for effective ways to remove this moisture. And while, improving drainage does help to get some of that water off quickly, the problem is we just don't have the ability to move things off necessarily as fast if there is nowhere for the water to go. Other problems being, again, if we have nothing using up that water, how do we get rid of the water that's just basically sitting in that soil? And that's where we're going to bring in the conversation about cover crops later on. a lot of people too, and myself included, are of course worried about salinity, and that might not be at the forefront of people's mind, thinking about salinity, but as we've talked about many times before in CropTalk and other presentations, salinity is a water problem. And so when you have high water tables, you end up having more chance for salts to be moving towards the surface. So we are concerned about this. So getting that water down into the ground, removing water from that water table is going to be critical to try to deal with some of these potential problems that are coming in the future. And this is the reason why we kind of titled this presentation about thinking forward to 2023. There's some things we cannot do too much in 2022 anymore with regards to getting a crop in the ground for this year's harvest, but what can we think about for managing for next year? When we talk about nitrogen, we do want to comment on the fact that denitrification and leaching has taken place in some areas. And so we've talked about that last week in CropTalk about what's going on with nitrogen and how we manage for that nitrogen. But what happens when you had either high nitrates in the soil from the droughty conditions last year, or we put down fertilizer last fall and now we still have unseeded acres? And so if we have those high nitrogen levels, we have more risk for future loss. And do we need to maybe scavenge some of that nitrogen or have something growing there this year once we can get something growing, even though it's too late for crop insurance deadlines, to at least use up and scavenge the nitrogen that is there, because otherwise we just continue to lose it through further denitrification or leaching. And then, of course, when it comes to forages, things are kind of up in the air on what the rest of the season's going to look like. But there's always this chance that we might be looking for forage this year. We had obviously a desperate need last year because of how dry it was. But we combined with, the late seeding this year for annual forages, let's say, or annual crops, plus all of this excess moisture in the spring. We don't really know what's going to be happening with regards to that forage concern. So there is an opportunity potentially for farmers to sell forage if they're looking at green feed on these fields. So I'm going to pass this over to Darren. He's going to cover some of the economics of the situation, and then we'll be back in a couple slides.
Thanks, Marla. I think what's important for this whole issue is to keep in mind what the end goal is, and that's that we have to make sure that the problem that we have this year with these unseeded acres don't spread into next year and take away next year's potential. And every option or solution that we look at should be made through that lens. So a lot of these farms have had production issues last year through the drought, and incredibly, we have excess moisture issues this year. If this problem spreads into next year, that's could be 3 years of great profit potential lost with these grain prices that we're seeing now. And even though these input prices are pretty high, there's still some profitability to be had. So that can affect a farm for many, many years. It takes away competitiveness, viability, and it just really hampers a farm in growing and thriving. So all these decisions we're going to talk about should be made with an eye towards next year. So there are several solutions. Obviously, summer fallow or a chem fallow is one of those solutions. And then also looking at getting a crop on that land, dewater the land, get it into shape for next year. So we're going to have different situations for different areas and even different situations on the same farm. It depends how impacted by water some of this land is. So we need to choose that solution that limits risks but gives you the best options, doesn't paint you in the corner, so to speak, for the different solutions that are available to us. Next slide, please. So with summer fallow and chem fallow, this isn't summer fallow and chem fallow of 2 to 3 years ago. We've seen an appreciation of these costs. Taking summer fallow, for example, when we use our machinery and equipment rental rate custom guide, we can see costs be around $15 per acre for a pass. Now, of course, it depends on the value of that equipment, but as we're using more expensive tillage tools, say high-speed discs, for example, this cost will be higher. And we have to keep in mind that diesel costs have increased, and we're in that $1.50, $2 a liter range right now, vastly different than what we've seen last summer or even a couple of years ago. With ChemFollow and the discussions around some of the availability of chemical, we've seen these costs increase to generally about $17 an acre counting application, keeping in mind that glyphosate alone has increased in that $14, $15, even above range. So this is no longer a cheap treatment. It's something that although there's still availability for glyphosate, we never know if we're going to get into supply issues, getting it when we need it, things like that. So we have to really look before we step when it comes down to these two options, because it isn't as cheap as what it was even just a few years ago. Next slide, please. So when we look at cropping solutions, we do have a few options for us, a few solutions to be able to look at. One is what I'd call a gamble crop. So essentially that's seeding a crop with the hope of harvesting it and selling the grain. With today's crop prices, even though we've seen grain prices take a dip here in June, even a third of a normal yield can produce some profit over operating expenses. Of course, though, the risk is that it's a bit of a all or none situation. We might get that third of a yield, or we might not get anything, depending on when the frosts come or when weather hits us in fall. So there's definitely a lot more risk when it comes down to considering a gamble crop. A lot of producers have chose green feed in the past, and it works well. It gets a crop growing on that land, dewatering the land, and also giving an opportunity to provide some income. Using our province's cost of production guidelines, we can see that a break-even yield over operating costs are about $83 for a short ton, or if we roll that into a 1,500 pound bale, about $62 a bale. So there's definitely some margin there. However, we have to remember that it can be hard to find a green feed market once it's seeded and we're growing it. This may work really well for some farms, either that have a livestock operation as part of the farm, or have some neighbors that have a demand for green feed. I would suggest to be able to look and see if you can secure the market for the green feed. I wouldn't be surprised if the forage market softens up a little bit, just with looking like we're going to get some hay yields this year as compared to last year, although the carry-in hay inventories on a lot of our livestock farms are at record low levels just because of the drought from last year and the feeding period that we've been through. So I think it's important to manage expectations and not think that this is a golden market to market forage into, just because we're going to have a bit more forage, and if more of these unseeded acres do get put into green feed, there'll just be more green feed on the market. Lastly is looking at a cover crop. The challenge with the cover crop is that there's no income, there's only expenses with this, and the expenses are nothing to look away from. You know, if seeding costs around 20 bucks an acre, or seed costs are in at $20, $30 an acre, and then we look at that stand termination tillage pass, 15 bucks an acre, we're around $60 an acre of commitment. However, the important part here is going back to where I started, is to take that step back and view the big picture being what's going to happen into next year, how are we going to get our land prepared into next year, and knowing that that's the end goal and the most important thing with this. And if we don't dewater this land, if we don't get this land prepared for next season, growing a cover crop in this example of the total cost around $60 an acre are actually pretty insignificant compared to the losses we could see from another year of no productivity on that land. So it's important to keep these in perspective. And to be honest, it might even be these three cropping scenarios might even be a bit of a read through, if you will, is okay, we're going to plant something and the gamble crop's probably going to have to be planted shortly here. But you might look at planting a gamble crop and it might turn into green feed depending on the situation. And again, it might just turn into a cover crop at the end with the stand termination if there's not enough green feed there, or if a market isn't secured, or the market softens up, or whatever the case may be, environmental considerations don't allow it to be harvested. So the biggest thing with this is that there's something growing on the land, taking the water out of the land, and most importantly, preparing it for next year. Next slide, and that wraps up my economic portion. Marla?
Thanks, Darren. Yeah, so I think it's good when you're talking about this idea of, thinking ahead to 2023. Right now, on these unseeded acres, we really do want to be thinking about what is the overall impact in the long run of making our choice this year on how we plan to manage this field. So yes, we can summer fallow. We've seen it done before. Versus putting in, some kind of summer cover, trying it as a gamble crop. Maybe it's a green feed, maybe it ends up just being a cover crop. But we know that things like summer fallow is not as effective at drying. If you think back to, summer fallow having been used as a moisture conservation tool in our kind of dry land or more arid regions, then if we're trying to actually dry things out, we probably have a better bet getting something growing and transpiring water through a plant out of the soil, as opposed to just trying to evaporate it. And the other issue, again, we know with summer fallow is if we're allowing salts to come up, that active evaporation, drawing salts up to the surface, drawing water up and out of the surface has those salts come along with it. And so summer fallowing is going to make these salinity potential problems worse. So we do want to think about downward movement of water or removing water out of the soil of the plant as much as we possibly can. There are additional risks, obviously, with summer fallowing, like wind and water erosion risks that come along with having damaged that soil structure and continuing with those tillage passes to deal with the weeds. We don't have any income from nitrogen or forage. We don't have any potential income as we might have with, say, the gamble crop green feed type situation. There's no chance of harvesting if we can't improve the conditions. And so the problem with the potential for these conditions not improving is that we're not really actively trying to improve them, again, if we don't have that crop growing. Summer fallowing is not going to help with improvements to soil health. It is it's definitely has a soil health disadvantage, again, with damaging that soil structure, increasing those risks of erosion, not to mention the tillage erosion itself just from moving that soil around. But then also, again, not managing for some of those salinity problems. And we're talking about multiple passes for either chemical or mechanical weed control. This can increase potential compaction risks as well. So there's all sorts of little issues that can come along that with summer fallowing or even chem fallowing that can over time become that much worse. And I have to put this in because I think we sometimes need a gentle reminder of past situations where we have seen something similar, maybe to a different scale, but something similar. And this is 2012, spring of 2012, which falls from the unseeded acres from 2011, the 2011 flood. And this, if anybody who's on this call or listening in remembers, we had a very dry, windy spring. And we had issues with wind erosion events because of, again, all of the excessive tillage that had been happening on those unseeded acres in 2011. And we had a major event on May 14th of 2012, where I remember at 5 o'clock, and even we spoke to like high school students about this the following year, they recalled being on the bus at the end of the day and not being able to see things on the road. It was an extreme kind of event that happened. It was a short-lived event, but an extreme event. And we might not think of this as being majorly detrimental in the long term in terms of how much soil may have been eroded. But the impact this particular year was actually that the sandblasting of canola, because this happened after canola had been seeded and had emerged, we ended up having a lot of reseeding happening for canola this year because the soil erosion caused that sandblasting of the canola seedlings and took out areas of canola. And so again, it's not meaning that we necessarily think we will have this happen again, but we just know that these are the types of situations that occur when we have these kind of major wind erosion events. And again, we can see this potential scale of event happen again if we're not managing these unseeded acres well and turning to summer fallow as the only major way to deal with weeds and drying out the soil. So I'm going to pass this over to Callum and let him continue on from here.
Okay, we can't hear anything yet, Callum and David.
You
may
figured
wanna
this might happen.
Yeah, you might want to zip over to Kim and borrow her audio, or open up the mic on your computer again. I see a delay. Just 1 minute, everyone. And okay.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, but I need you to turn off one or the other. Okay, carry on. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. So what are some of the reasons that we should be considering summer cover? So as Marla's told us, summer cover more efficiently dries out a field than summer fallow, particularly at some of the deeper depths to really help us lower that water table. And of course, when we're lowering a water table, there's a lot less risk of us drawing salinity up through the water profile to the soil profile to the surface. And then we also have the added benefit of weed control, because a lot of the crops that we'll be growing over the summer will be very competitive against weeds. And it also offers us some opportunity to control some of these herbicide-resistant weed problems we're seeing, and also helps us. Yeah, that's great. And so some more reasons to consider summer cover. We can help lower the risk, as Marla's just said. Summer fallow can increase the risk of tillage erosion, as well as wind and water erosion. And we usually only need fewer passes for summer fallow than we would for chem fallow or traditional summer fallow with tillage, which can also reduce some of the compaction risks we can get from passes, especially when we have soil which is still wet. And then another benefit, which I'm sure a lot of you have heard, is that whenever we're having plants growing in the soil, we can get some soil health benefits associated with increasing the amount of growing roots in the soil, and also being able to feed the soil biology. And this can be very helpful, especially when we're talking about fostering mycorrhizal relationships in the soil. Next slide, please, Marla, thanks. So some other reasons to consider soil cover. So as we've mentioned before, if we're talking about a gamble crop, we may still have an opportunity to harvest an annual cash crop if the season permits. And we also have the opportunity, if we're wanting to fix nitrogen, we can add legumes to our summer cover, and we're actually going to benefit potentially from gaining some nitrogen. And if we have, for example, in the fall applied anhydrous nitrogen, and we don't want to lose that nitrogen through, say, leaching, we can actually plant something like a cereal crop that will actually scavenge that excess nitrogen, store it in the crop biomass, and that allows us in the future then to mineralize that nitrogen, which would otherwise be lost. And then, of course, we also have that potential to provide an alternate source of forage for livestock. So there's many different things that we can benefit from summer cover. Next slide, please. Thank you. So what should I actually be growing over the summer? Well, there's really many options out there. And one thing I really want people to come away with this is knowing that basically anything that you're growing will remove moisture more than growing nothing. So the crop that a farm will choose will depend on the specific situation on that farm, the goals that the farmer actually wants to achieve by growing this summer cover. So if their major goal is to dry out the soil, if they're wanting nitrogen, if they're wanting scavenge nitrogen, and also what that farmer actually has available. So talking about what a farm has available, I want people to understand that what you're growing over the summer, it doesn't have to be complex. And you can really use what you have at hand. So that could be some cash crop seed you purchased and were intending to plant as a cash crop, or actually just what you have in your grain bin. So another thing I want people to just think about is once you purchase cash crop seed, it's not very likely you can actually return that back to your supplier. And year on year, the viability of the stored seed will decrease. So it may make economic sense for you to actually plant it this year as either a gamble crop or summer cover. Next slide, please, Marla. So some questions I want people to be thinking about if they're thinking about growing some form of summer cover. So first of all, it all goes back to goals. Think, what is my primary aim with my summer cover? And it's probably trying to dry down the soil, but we could have some other co-aims in there as well. We need to think about when deciding what we're wanting to grow. And one of those things that we should be really thinking about is there still a chance that I can plant a gamble crop that would reach maturity if the fall conditions allow? We need to be thinking, am I wanting to use up some of the residual nitrogen I want to use up? And that might make us think of, crops, maybe a cereal or that will, help scavenge some of that nitrogen. And do I want to fix nitrogen? Should I be considering a legume crop? Next slide, Marla. And then again, if we're thinking about if I want to grow forage, I need to be thinking, what type of forage am I going for? Do I want to be looking at silage? Do I want cattle to be grazing in pasture in my field? And do I want to harvest it for green feed? But then one of the most important things I think people need to really think about is, well, yes, I want to grow, a forage, but do I have cattle myself, or do I actually have a buyer lined up? Because markets are very important when we're trying to think of where our forage may be going. So next slide, Marla. Some other things we need to consider is how you're actually going to be seeding your crop. What equipment do you have available? Are you thinking about drilling your seed, broadcasting? Also, just as I said before, what seed do we have available? Do we have some seed that's won't cost us too much money, that's all lying around in your grain bin? And also, does the crop fit into your rotation? And crucially, what type of weed, pest, and disease pressures already exist in the field? But another major thing to consider is how will we actually manage this residue and how will we terminate this summer cover? Because depending on what type of summer cover you're using and how long it's going to be in the field, this could be a major thing to really think about, is how we manage this residue. So you may need to think about if you're going to be terminating with, maybe you're going to get livestock to graze it, maybe it's going to be cut, but also you might need to terminate with a herbicide. You might need to till under the residue, so then we're going to be able to do some nice planting in the spring. Next slide, please. And just some other things to think about if we are thinking about annual forages. Just remember, almost anything can be grazed. And if we're thinking about doing a gamble crop, remember that many of the common cash crops that you may be considering planting also make great green feed, particularly if we're not able to, if that gamble crop doesn't pay off. We're also able to use it as a green feed, including things like barley, oats, winter and spring wheat, fall rye, canola. There's grazing potential there. If we're looking for stored feed swath grazing, we'd ideally like to harvest sometime about the soft dough stage. And for planting for most sort of these forages, you plant very similarly to how you plant a cash crop, but you generally increase the planting rate to increase the density, often between 10 to 20%. Next slide, please, Marla. And just a few things that we should at least be aware of, particularly for people who don't actually have cattle. We really need to think about some of these potential issues we could have with grazing. Now, if you are selling to a livestock farmer, they will be aware of these issues. So it's not like you need to go home and research them a huge amount, but just be aware that they exist. And some of these issues, we can have toxicity issues from, say, brassicas. We may have bloat risk from some crops, especially sort of red clover, resulting in sort of frothy bloat. You can have some coumarin issues from, say, if you're growing crops such as sweet clover. And then we may have some nitrate toxicity issues. But as I say, the livestock farmer should be able to help you out there, and you can always look these issues up, but just be aware that they exist. Next slide, please, Marla. And now, a lot of people might be thinking, should I be keeping it simple, or should I be looking at sort of a mix over the summer of species? So when we're considering whether we should go a monocrop or sort of a polycrop, remember, if we're growing a monocrop, it'll be a lot easier to harvest if there's a potential that your gamble crop could actually make it to maturity. It can also be a lot simpler to manage. And one of those reasons is because it's easier to plant, because you're only going to be dealing with one seed size that only needs to be sown at one depth. It's also going to be quite often easier to control weeds, simply because we're going to have more chemical control options available to us. And also we may be able to keep the seed cost down, as we're only relying on just one species of seed. Next slide, please, Marla. Now, mixing species. Now, of course, there is a potential to increase nutrient utilization and produce overall more dry matter per acre if we are planting an intercrop than a monocrop. And we can also get the benefit of different plants in the mix can be used to achieve different goals. So we can think of a lot of these summer covers as a bit like a toolbox, where some plants will be really good at certain things, such as nitrogen fixation from a legume. Some may be far better at compaction reduction. Some might be a lot better at scavenging nitrogen. So you have the ability to potentially combine some of these different benefits. However, you can run into trouble when mixing different species which have different planting depths, which can cause issues with establishment. And of course, as I said before, you may have some issues with mixed species affecting use of herbicides in your crop. So next slide, Marla. And so just to wrap everything together, what do I want people to come away from this presentation, the key messages? So I want people to understand that summer cover does have many potential benefits and can help farmers avoid many of the negative effects of summer fallow, especially when we're talking about really lowering that water table and drying out our fields. And I really want farmers to consider what they have readily available and what goals they'd actually like to achieve. And I want people to remember that you do not need to grow a complex species mix, and you can choose to use what you have available. Thank you everyone for this presentation, and we have time to take a few questions.
Okay, thanks guys. There is a couple questions and then one question I think of my own. One question is the nitrogen that these plants will scavenge, will it be available for next year's crop?
Would you like me to take this? Oh, sorry.
Yeah, go for it, Callum.
I was just going to say it will depend on a number of factors, including obviously the carbon to nitrogen ratio. Obviously, up in the prairies, mineralization isn't often as fast as it is further down in America, where a lot of people are looking at cover crops, but it will be released slowly over time. But Marla may want to add some more there.
Yeah, there's just a lot of factors that'll be in play in terms of how quickly that mineralization will happen. The drier and kind of cooler conditions will slow that mineralization down. So quite often we can't guarantee that it will be coming out next year. It will come out over time. But it's kind of hard. It's very hard for us in Manitoba, the prairie provinces, to be able to predict how quickly that mineralization will happen just because of our weather.
Okay, and then the second part to that question is, if I chem fallow or fallow, what happens to the nitrogen I applied last fall?
I can answer that one. This will depend a bit on the weather, but right now we're losing it, as we talked about last week at CropTalk. If it stays wet, with wet conditions, we can see either leaching downwards or that denitrification happening where it's lost atmospherically. So the problem is we can't guarantee that nitrogen is just going to sit and stay where it is, which is why one of the reasons why we would prefer to see something growing to scavenge and use up that nitrogen, takes it into that plant material. At least it kind of holds it in place. Even though it will be slowly mineralized out, it's better than kind of losing it all over this summer.
Okay, and then the question I've been, when I've been talking to, talking to producers over the last week here, seems like everybody's saying that this fall I'm draining, this fall I'm draining. Is drainage the answer? Because one of the things I've been seeing in the field is that I'm also seeing a lot of erosion from all this water moving fast across fields or fast through some of the drainage ditches now. They're getting bigger and deeper.
Yep, we're seeing that too. Faster drainage. And I mean, I can't comment too heavily on whether or not drainage is going to be the answer for next year, because again, we don't really know what we're dealing with next year. In terms of how much snow we have, how much rain we have in spring, how fast that is coming at us, how fast we need to move it off the field. I mean, obviously drainage needs to be permitted. All of that needs to be in play as part of that solution. But recognizing too that a lot of our drainage problems that we were seeing this year weren't necessarily fixed by having had that drainage in place, if that makes sense. The water needs to have somewhere to go. And in a lot of cases, there was just too much to have to move, and that moving it faster off the field with your own infield drainage doesn't necessarily mean it's going to move faster if there's nowhere for it to go downstream. So that's a tricky one in terms of whether or not those activities are actually going to benefit us next year. Because again, it really just depends on how fast and furious everything is happening in one moment.
Okay, thanks guys. That was some really good information. I think it's something we need to look at, whether it be trying to dry out the land or trying to make some money off of some of that land that's sitting idle right now. And I agree. I think there might be some markets for feed. It might be a little softer as the first cut looks good, but we're still a week away from first cut starting in a lot of areas. So I would say that you know, the potential still is there. So thanks again for that presentation and the good information. So Lori, if you could hand me back the screen, we'll go to our scouting panel. I've got a few questions to ask the panel. And I'm going to jump this question, come back to it, because I've been texted pictures of this as our crop talk has been going on. And same crop, barley field, and noticing this type of symptoms, and was wondering if anybody has any comments of what might be going on with the barley crop. I got an idea myself, but I was wanting to see what everybody else had to say.
John Hurt has an opinion.
Okay, John?
Yeah, looks like my barley at home growing in my saturated soils. But this is a problem we used to see in Ontario all the time when people would seed barley without seed treatment. And I'd say first look at the roots and see if those roots are functional, because you know, barley is particularly susceptible to, of the cereals, it's the weakest on wet, waterlogged soils. If that's the case, it will kind of grow out of it if as a new batch of roots reestablishes. But I would look at the roots before I would throw more nitrogen on that. My thought.
Okay, any other comments? Okay, well, I'm gonna let you guys know what I think. When I was out in the field looking at this, and I noticed it was on the newer, the younger leaves, and I also noticed, and if you could see my pointer on the screen, the tops of some of the leaves look like they're whitish type color. Would this be caused because of the heat we received on Saturday and Sunday, and then the strong winds, where those leaves would have been closer to the soil surface at that time and kind of got heat banding, and then the wind, you could see that whitish on the top of the leaves. Would that be from the major winds we had? What do you think about that, John?
Yeah, I'm not thinking so much the wind burning. The heat banding, you know, barley shows it better than any other crop. But if that was heat banding, that would mean that those bleached areas were right at the soil surface when things were really hot. And I think this crop is a little more advanced than what was suffering the extreme heat on the weekend. But I'm sure that you know, some crops that did have leaf tissue sitting at, you know, at the soil surface when it got so hot, I'm sure that they will be exhibiting, you know, what you're describing soon. I think this is wet feet myself.
Okay, another comment just came in. It's on the oldest leaves in there, the field he's looking at, and he's asking, what about bacterial blight?
Well, the soil fertility specialist is going to answer that.
Dave's here, Lionel.
You bet,
And,
David.
on barley, I expect not. I think that's quite unlikely. Possibly on oats, a crop that we see more bacterial blight, but no, not barley. And maybe I'll add to the comments you made about tips of leaves in cereal crops being burned or bleached. We have seen a lot of that right around where we are, and it affects oats worse than other cereals. And what's happening is the stomates are open, so the plant is respiring, and it can't provide the moisture as quickly as it's being drawn off by those hot winds. Now, if you suspect that is the problem in your field, look for sheltered areas where the prevailing winds did not have the same impact. You'll probably see an area of the field that is green compared to the rest. We've seen that in the past as well.
Okay, good point. So I think gonna maybe go with John's comment about wet feet as being the problem, and hopefully with some drier weather coming up here, we'll see this outgrow it. So great, thanks for the input on that, guys. I'm gonna go back one, and this question came in well, last couple days, and it's winter wheats in the flag leaf, the early heading stage, and what's the thoughts about spraying for Fusarium? So I posed the question to Dave Kaminsky, and Dave, I think you were able to put together maybe a couple slides. So if we could pass the screen over to Dave, we will go from there.
Okay, thanks, Lionel. Just wondering which screen is active because I have too many
We can see your screen right now. Fusarium risks for fall seeded crops.
Great. But can you see a lot of black around it in my next slide as well?
Okay, have you gone to the next slide?
I'll get going.
It looks good, David. Good. Look.
Yeah,
Okay.
On. Yeah.
perfect.
Here's that picture that Lionel showed, which is a winter wheat crop that is approaching heading. It's not quite there yet. I'd say we've got the flag leaf fully emerged and maybe the tips of the awns showing. That is not yet a susceptible stage. Also want to point out the tower in the background, which is the weather station, and this is around Oakburn, Manitoba. So when it comes to applying fungicides, the timing window is very narrow, and it is between the time that the head is emerged and the flowers appear. That is the anthers, which are yellow and they're chucked outside of the glooms. Once flowering has occurred, the developing ovules are not generally any longer susceptible to the fungus, even though spores are blowing around in the neighborhood. Now, we produce a Fusarium risk forecast, and that will actually be public next week. We are already working on, in the background, testing with current data. We just used some dummy data yesterday, and the model seems to be working well. We can provide a sneak peek to others soon, but I want to point out that the model that we use focuses chiefly on the factors that favor infection, which are heat and humidity. Humidity above 85% and temperatures in the range of 15 to 30 degrees Celsius. If it gets hotter than that, the risk is very low. When it drops down below 15, especially for getting temperatures of 10 at night, there really is no chance of infection. But Lionel was asking me about conditions where even, well, through the night, humidity was 100% and it was staying moist on the leaves, even into the morning, almost to the noon hour period. So here's a snapshot I took from the Oakburn weather station. I grabbed it in the middle of the afternoon yesterday. But if you look at the plot here, I don't know if you can see my mouse as a pointer. Anyway, the top one that shows both air temperature on the left axis and humidity on the right axis. I put in a little purple line to show where 85% relative humidity is. And of course, it's up right through the night and begins to taper off. Heat and humidity often run in opposite directions. I guess when it's cool, the humidity is high. When the temperature soars, the humidity will drop. I think that's quite intuitive. Also on that plot, I have shown with the orange line where the temperature is falling below that 15-degree bottom threshold. And a little bit more about that model that we use. It looks at two factors. The first is hours in the day or in the 24-hour period where temperature is between 15 and 30. And then that goes back over the 7 days leading up to today. And the second factor is the number of hours in which there has been measurable rainfall in that same 7-day period. So looking back to Lionel's slide, this is a little bit closer, the stage that we're at with winter wheat. Of the fall seeded crops, rye that I've seen is fully headed and probably flowered as well. So though we might be getting those conditions that are favorable now, rye is probably out of the woods. As a type, winter wheat is more susceptible than our spring wheats are to disease, to Fusarium head blight. And most of the time, as a crop, it escapes infection because it's flowering and heading, or heading and flowering during the part of the season when it's traditionally cooler. But this year, it looks like things might be lining up for conditions that are conducive to infection this time of year. Of course, the spring crop is far from that kind of stage of maturity, so that's off in the distance. But it's the winter wheat crop that we're focusing on right now. And so the crop is susceptible from the time that the head has cleared the boot until the first anthers, or actually all the anthers over the head, are showing. And that can be lengthened or compressed depending on the amount of heat we're getting. The hotter it is, the shorter the window. And if it stays down the bottom range of that temperature, ideal temperature, then flowering will be lengthened. You should also think about the amount of tillering in the crop. We generally want to protect with fungicides the primary head and first tiller. Anything beyond that would be gravy if we harvested as plump kernels, but it's more important to protect those first two heads. On this slide, which is in two parts, we're zeroing in on the center gloom, opening it up to reveal the developing ovule. This has not yet flowered, but you can see the, I don't know, feathery end of the ovule, and the anthers are still not really visible. But within a few days, they will develop and be chucked outside. The pollination or the fertilization happens within the closed glooms. Now, this is looking back at approximately a year ago when the southwest part of the province in the third week of June was already showing high or even extreme risk in some cases. Of course, that depends on the crop stage of development. Now, here's a capture from just this morning of the conditions at Oakburn, and we see that there is a long stretch where the humidity remains above 85%, but for most of that, the temperature has dropped below that 15-degree threshold. So, you know, one cooler day affects the amount of time that there is this unique coincidence of heat and humidity that leads to disease. And quick slide of the life cycle of this disease. Probably a lot of the potentially infective material comes from corn stover. The infection might not be evident on the ears of the corn from last year, but the fungus will thrive quite well on corn stover, corn stubble, and that's what would be the inoculum for our small seeded cereals in the spring. So, hope it didn't go too long. That's what I had on Fusarium risk right now, and I'm available for questions later, if not now. So thanks for your attention.
Great, thanks, David. Good answer for that, and I think everybody's kind of just waiting on the winter wheat as it's getting closer for spraying. So if I could get the screen back.
Okay.
Okay, good, thanks. I was getting this question a bit, so I'm going to open it up to Dane and John. A lot of talk recently about seed treatments for flea beetles and control not working as good as they should, and I was just wondering if you guys maybe had a few comments to make as to what you feel. I know a lot of producers are saying that it just didn't seem to last as long or not working as long. So have you guys got any comments regarding that?
I don't know that they're not working. I think it's just the sheer number of flea beetles that are out there. Remember that they do have to take a bite or two to be killed. And I think what we're seeing, some areas, I think the sheer numbers are just so large that just that bite or two they're taking to get killed, if you have enough flea beetles doing that, you're still getting a fair amount of damage. So I don't think it's that the seed treatments aren't working. the numbers are probably the thing causing the damage. The other thing to consider too is Bob Elliott did do some research in Saskatoon looking at moisture conditions and the seed treatments. And when you have excessive moisture, sometimes the seed treatments don't work as well or as long. It could be a leaching effect. He really didn't pinpoint exactly why, but when you get the excessive moisture conditions, often you don't get quite the same control you do under a bit drier conditions.
Oh, that's a really good point. Dane, any comments there?
Nothing more specific to add to that. I mean, John hit it in well. I know there was some talk too that seed treatments don't contain neonicotinoids anymore, and that's not true. That special review for neonicotinoid insecticides applied more for special crops. The use pattern in canola was unchanged, so we do still see those neonics on all our canola seed treatments, and all at very, very similar rates. Some minute points of a gram difference over an entire acre, that sort of thing. But just understand that seed treatments that are active on flea beetles are in the group 4A, C, or D class of insecticides. They are not the group 28 diamides. So Fortenza and Lumiderm in particular has flea beetles on the label, but that's only at the higher rates, and it is not designed as a flea beetle specific product. It's really excellent on cutworms, but it's not really made for flea beetles. You're not going to be seeing the same level of control you would there versus say something like a 4D or a 4C, which contain Buteo or Fortenza Advanced.
Okay, good. Good points, guys. And I think the moisture thing is something that was really interesting. Okay, next. That's going to be it for the panel as well for today. And Marla, any comments regarding the crop diagnostic school? She might have left. I think she had an appointment. Anyways, if you're looking at going to the crop diagnostic school, July 5th to the 8th, and registration is happening now. So there's the registration link as well as Marla's link, and I think there is a Friday that's producer day, but better double check with Marla on that one.
Yeah, you are correct there, Lionel. Here, I'm still here.
Okay.
And yes, Farmer Friday is a go. So if anybody has interest in attending, it is free for members of Manitoba Crop Alliance. They are providing sponsorship this year. For anybody who is not an MCA member, you can still attend. You'll just have to pay for your own way. But if they have any questions, they can feel free to email me or mbcropschool@gmail.com in order to let me know if they have questions or wish to register.
Great, thanks, Marla. Also, tours are going to start happening, and our crop diversification centers have listed their tour dates for this year. So July 20th at Melita, July 26th at Arborg, 27th at Roblin, and August the 9th at Carberry. So if you're interested in seeing what's happening at the diversification centers, what research they're doing there, what trials they're doing there, there'll be great days to go and see some really good information there. So mark those on your calendars, or if you want more information, just go to the crop diversification website and you can make your contacts. Weed guides still available, and if you're wanting more than one, give Kim a call. Otherwise, contact our ag service centers. There's the contact information for the guys in the field out here, local ag adaptation specialists. So if you got questions or have something happening in the field that you're concerned about, please give these guys a call. livestock specialists, again, their information as we're getting more into haying season, as we're getting into looking at some of these unseeded acres, and maybe they have some ideas of what might be a preference if you're looking at planting something for sale, or if you're looking at even looking at extending your own grazing season. So they'll have a lot of good information for you regarding that. Our Ag Service Center contact information, and mine and Lori's contact information. That does it for today. Thanks for attending, and see everybody next week, June the 29th. Hopefully by that time we've got a lot of the crops sprayed. Thanks for attending.